How you doing? My name is No Sweat, Earl Lowell, Robbie, No Sweat Robbins Jr. I'm right under the name No Sweat. That's my pen name. I've written 8 novels, 8 books, and I always write under No Sweat. And for the last 40, 50 years, I've written under the name No Sweat, all kinds of articles that I've done on spelunking and hunting Kentucky red agate and Indian relics and excavating for Civil War, bringing up muskets from the Yucatan, and finding the most Arawak burials ever found in the Bahamas. I write articles for different magazines, and I always write under No Sweat. A dive shop gave me that name, dive shop on Singer Island. The woman who ran that dive shop gave me that name because of the way I was around sharks. And she always told anybody that was going to go out diving with us. I worked as a diver for 15 summers on and off. When I went out, I was a safety diver and guide, and I watched over people who were diving with me. And she always told them, don't worry about sharks because you've got no sweat with you. And so that name stuck, and so I started using No Sweat. And today we're doing something completely different than I've done with any of my YouTube videos. Today's September 30th. I mean, it's August 31st, almost September. August 31st, 2025. We're in about a 75-degree summer day here in eastern Kentucky in Richmond. We're at the bottom of the hill where all my pigeon lofts are at, down near the creek. I've got 5 acres here, and I'm letting all 5 acres, except for the area closest to the pigeon lofts, I'm letting it all grow up completely wild, to be retaken completely back over by nature. This is the second year that I've not mowed, not done anything. If a tree falls, it falls. If weeds grow up, they grow up. I'm letting the land go back completely to nature, and I'm hoping to leave it this way till long after I'm dead, and my grandson Lance will take care of the place then. And I want to turn it back into a mini nature preserve right in the middle of town. Already I've got hundreds of butterflies coming to ironweed and the different flowers wildflowers that are blooming here. And I've got wood ducks on the creek. I've got deer coming here already, right in the middle of town. So I can see it eventually turning into a real nice, wildlife preserve. A small one, but some place for the squirrels and the birds and the butterflies and the bees and everything to come to. And my pigeons are going to be right in the middle of it. I'm going to continuously develop these pigeon lofts that I've got. We're going to build another pigeon loft this fall. I'm hoping to make it a flying loft. I want to build it 8 by 16, strictly one big room that I'll keep basically young birds in, and I'll be training those young birds out to 500, 600, and possibly 700 miles. I've flown 700 miles 4 times in my life, and all 4 times those birds came back. I had birds come back from Key West, Florida, 2 different times. That's 1,000 miles. And I specialize in long distance. And I'm devoted entirely to one breed of pigeon, one strain of pigeon, one family of pigeon, and they are Sions. And I am the only person in the United States alive today that has birds that came directly from Paul Sion. My birds came from Charles Heitzman, and Charles Heitzman imported birds 7 different times into the United States, 4 times before World War II, while Paul Sion was alive, and he bought those birds from Paul Sion. During the war, the Sions had to give their birds, Paul and his son, Robert, they had to give their birds to the French underground, which was in the southern half of France, and they used those to send messages. At the end of World War II, Paul Sion died, I think in 1946, the year after World War II, and Paul's son, Robert, went around the French underground and gathered up some birds, and he had a few other Sions sent back to him that they had prior to World War II. So and I noticed that there is a slight difference between what Paul Sion had and what Robert Sion had. And the few people that do have Sions today probably got them from somebody that got them from Robert Sion, because Paul Sion was dead in 1946, and with John Garzoli being one of the people who imported birds, and he didn't import that many times, but he brought birds from Robert Sion, not Paul. And there was a difference in the quality of those birds, particularly their homing instinct. That's not what I'm here to shoot a video about, but I wanted to clear that up, that I do have the old original Paul Sions, not Robert Sions. And there is a distinction there. But I have been working with those birds, and I've developed them into my own family. This is into my 68th year with racing pigeons. There's not a whole lot of guys in the United States right now that have had pigeons 70 years. They might be 70 years old, but they haven't had pigeons for 70 years. What I wanted to do today, I wanted to make sure that you realize that we're shooting with a different format. My grandson, Lance, which is have been helping me take care of the pigeons for many years, and has really stepped up the last couple of years to do almost everything that I do with the birds. He's shooting this video right now with an underwater camera. It's it's a cheaper underwater camera that's sold at Walmart. They're still good for like shooting underwater pictures up to 50 and 60 feet, and you can shoot movies with them. So we're shooting a YouTube movie today with an underwater camera that he's using, and he's got it on me focused on right now, and it's the first time we've ever done this. I don't know what the sound's going to be like. I don't know what the image is going to be like. We're going to probably have some trouble editing this, but we're experimenting. I want to see how it turns out. I wanted to talk about something that everybody skims over today. It's not going to be a long video. I'm going to shoot some really long videos after we do this one to see how this turns out. And I'll be thrilled because I'll be able to start shooting videos more often, and to answer a lot of questions that I've had many people across the United States and all over North and South America, Central America, and all over Asia and Europe have all been writing to me, emailing, calling me, and asking me questions about. And I've written a lot of it down so that I'll be able to address the questions. But today, you know how all pigeon guys, they say, oh, I started out when I was a little boy. You know, I did this when I was a little boy, this and that. But they really don't go a lot into detail. Some of them will say, well, you know, my grandfather took me to the club meeting and I started doing this, or my dad did it. Or, you know, or I'm third generation pigeon guy. You know, I grew up in pigeon life. I got a lot of respect for guys that did that. You know, it was wonderful. I mean, but for me, I'm going to tell my story, and I'm not going to skim over how I got started into pigeons, because it's been a miracle, a strange happening in my life. I don't know, a destiny, how I wound up with pigeons. My father, at the end of World War II, he was in the Merchant Marines. He was torpedoed 3 times. In the North Atlantic. At the end of World War II, he came back. He saved a lot of his money during World War II, and my dad was a hustler. He didn't have a good education. He was a bus boy up in New York, didn't have a high school degree, and had hitchhiked to New York, where his brother played a trumpet in the Cotton Club with Billie Holiday at times. Dad got to meet Billie Holiday, and Billie Holiday, I was raised up listening to nothing but Billie Holiday songs. Still love Billie Holiday. My first novel I wrote, These Precious Days, is nothing but Billie Holiday songs. There's 104 chapters in there. All 104 chapters are Billie Holiday songs. I'm a Billie Holiday fanatic, but I got that from my father, who knew Billie Holiday, and his brother, Uncle Lance. When Dad came back from World War II, he came into eastern Kentucky, and he came to a place called Irvine, Kentucky, 20 miles east of Richmond, Kentucky, and Richmond is about 20 miles southeast of Lexington. And when Dad drove in, he had a convertible and had his ducktails. He looked just like Robert Mitchum. And my mother's father had retired from the railroad and was being a very successful businessman. He had built 2 theaters and had built the drive-in. He owned hotels. He owned farms. He owned a lot of rental property, apartment buildings. He was all business, my grandfather, but the nicest guy in all of the county, which was called Estill County. Everybody knew him because everybody went to the picture shows in the 1950s, and if you went to the picture shows, you knew my grandfather. Well, when my mother and father met each other, they fell almost instantly in love. Mother was 14 years old and working at a popcorn stand, when she was a very beautiful girl, had Lauren Bacall eyes, beautiful skin, and one of the richest girls in the county, if not the richest. So Dad was very attracted to her, and they went together for a little over a year, and Dad married her when she was 16 years old. My grandfather wasn't happy about it. My grandmother said it was the only time she ever saw him, my grandfather cry, was when she married Dad, and when he accidentally backed up and killed his little dog that he had one time, that he loved so much. Sweetman was the name of the dog. Anyways, when Mom and Dad got married, my grandfather tried to help them. They didn't have any money, and he gave them an apartment to live in on the 3rd floor of a big hotel that he had at that time. And so when I was born, and I was born on a Thursday afternoon, on a hot Thursday afternoon on August 23rd, and Thursday children are supposed to be ambitious and born under the sign of Jupiter, and supposed to be generous and a very positive attitude. I try to be like that, and we lived there for 3 years, and I can still, as old as I am, I've got real foggy, vague memory of living in that little bitty room in that hotel for the first 3 years of my life. But my grandfather decided that our little family should have a little bit better place to live in than a one room. And so he moved us out of that room into an apartment building that you had to go up about 30 small steps to get up to where the apartment was at. It was right beside his theater. And we thought, or my parents thought it was luxurious to get to move out of that one room into an actual apartment where we had a few rooms. And my grandfather, within a couple of years, built a room off to the back of it out of pine boards. It was like building a barn hooked onto the back of it. And it sat on, I won't say stilts, but it had support posts in the back. And because it had those support posts, it had an area underneath of it. I only mention this because I slept out on that back room. That's where I spent most of my life. And underneath that area is where I built my first pigeon loft. It was the only place that I had any place to build a pigeon loft. But I'm jumping the horse cart before the horse right now. I want to get back to how I started. When I was a little bitty boy, even at 6 months old, I think 6 months, maybe it was 7 or 8 months old, I was picked up on the Irvine Bridge at about 2 o'clock in the morning by someone. My wife's, one of her friends would tell her about it all the time, how they were coming across the Irvine Bridge and saw a little baby crawling across the bridge, and they picked him up and brought him into town, and they found out it was me. My mother and Dad were asleep. I'd crawled down, I guess backwards down those steps, and somehow I got out that door and went down the street a little bit and started crawling across that long bridge during the middle of the night. First of all, when my mother had me on that Thursday, on August 23rd, she'd had 2 dead children before me, and 2 miscarriages. And so they didn't, when I was born, I didn't breathe either, and they didn't think that I was alive. And the doctor who was the one that was with my mother when she had me, Dr. Virginia Lewis, the one they named the hospital after back town, she told me that she had given me up for dead, and that she had came over to me about a minute after she had laid me down, and one last time picked me up by my heels and slapped me on my rear end and real hard several times, and I burst out crying. And she said, looked over at my mother, and my mother smiled, and I was alive. And I told her that's the way I came into the world, and that's been pretty much standard procedure for me ever since, getting whipped at all different levels. But I don't have any complaints. I've been very successful and been very lucky. Anyways, I grew up in this little apartment, and for the next, after I was 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, and in the 1950s, we didn't know it in the 1950s, but all us children that lived in the 1950s, we couldn't have been living in a more Walt Disney world. It was, we stayed outside all the time, and I didn't stay in that little bitty apartment. It was hot in the summer. We didn't have air conditioning, and the little bitty heat that we had in the winter, we had a little gas stove. It didn't keep anything warm. It was almost like camping out all the time. It was miserable in the summer. So in the mornings, I would get up and I would go down the steps, either the back steps or the back or the front steps to get out of that apartment. And when I did, I went out the front steps. The only thing there was in front of me was a sidewalk that led right straight over to the bridge. I was very close to the bridge. The bridge was a big steel structure with arches in it. It's been painted several times over the years, and it was my focal point, the iconic structure of all of the whole place. And so I was gravitated to that bridge and played around that bridge. There was a little bitty tree down there that had sour apples. I ate the sour apples, and I played under the bridge and would tear off sticks, cane poles, and make myself fishing poles under that bridge. Saw other guys that fished down there, Jim Rising and stuff, and would listen to him tell stories. Caught lizards under the bridge. We had a railroad track that went under the bridge. I'd see how far I could walk without falling off the tracks. I put coins on the bridge and would flatten them out. There was telephone line poles that ran underneath the bridge. And there wasn't anything underneath that bridge I didn't know. The Kentucky River was there. It was about 20 foot deep, but it ran across for about 125 yards, 150 yards across that bridge, across the river, underneath that bridge. To the first level of the bridge was 60 feet high, and then up in the arch I was close to 90 feet high. The one thing that caught my attention while I was 5 and 6 years old, particularly because I was already outside, my mother and dad just turned me loose. I guess nowadays people would be in child services for that, but in the 1950s in a small hillbilly town, it was pretty commonplace for kids to play. And my parents gave me all the liberty on earth. And at very early age, 6 and 7 years old, I was down underneath the bridge where the railroad could have been ran over by a train. The trains were coming in and out of the mountains bringing in coal. And my grandfather had retired as an engineer and had gone in partners and became a businessman. So he was very knowledgeable about everybody in Irvine and Ravenna, the town I grew up in. Everyone knew all about the railroad yards and about trains. Lots of people were engineers or had something to do with the trains. And listening to the trains where I lived at in that apartment was part of my life. It was just like somebody playing music all the time. I was constantly hearing trains blowing whistles or starting up or on the tracks, all of that making different noises. And some of it became timely. You would know a certain train was coming through at a certain time and so forth. But there I was, 5 or 6 years old. And the one thing that caught my attention, more than anything, was those pigeons on that bridge. I would sit still and see these beautiful pigeons. I could almost see them right now in my mind. I would see these blue bars, and I'd see blue bar white flights. Every now and then I'd see a bird that had a lot of white on it, and I'd be like, oh my God, look how beautiful that bird is. And sometimes I even saw a bird might be a red check or have red on it. As a little boy, I just thought they were marvelous. There was one spot that I could sit at, and I could see the birds land on this little flat area on the lower part of the bridge. And when they would land there, they would strut, coo at each other, chase each other, and in the evenings they would go underneath a little opening that went on up underneath the bridge and disappear. And they would disappear in the daytime there. Sometimes they would turn around in circles. But for the minute or 30 seconds or whatever that I sat there and watched them do that, sometimes 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, it was just like I was hypnotized, sitting there watching those birds. And I thought to myself, boy, I would love to have one of those birds. Just, there was nobody I knew had a pigeon. I never heard anybody talk about a pigeon. I didn't see any magazines with pigeons. I didn't hear anything about pigeons on TV. I didn't know anything about a pigeon club. My parents didn't say a word about pigeons. Nobody in my family, no friends. There was no mention of pigeons ever in my life. I was not around anybody with pigeons. It was just this odd, singular attraction that I had myself with that particular bird, not knowing anything about it other than it was just fascinating. And so one late summer night, probably it was in October, as best I can remember. It's not a summer, it's more in fall. When it was a warm night. On Saturday nights, my grandfather, at the theater, he would play the Saturday matinee, which was always a Western, and then he would play it again that afternoon, and then at Saturday nights, usually starting around 9 or 10 o'clock at night, he always played a scary movie. He played Frankenstein or The Mummy or the Monster from the Black Lagoon or the Blob. Just things today that were ridiculously funny if you look at them today, but back then were just scared you to death. You couldn't put your hands over your eyes and crack your fingers and then put your hands back just to see a glimpse moment of that movie because it was so scary. And I had friends that would come to the theater with me, and we would try to sit on the front row and watch one of those scary movies. And I would hold on to them just to see. They couldn't stand it. They didn't have enough nerve to watch the movie, so they would get up and run up the aisle so that that monster on the screen wouldn't get them. And so it was a test of bravery just to watch those Saturday night movies at times when you were really little. But on this particular Saturday night, I had planned ahead of time to try to catch a pigeon. So during the day, that afternoon, I had hunted for a board, and I'd found just the perfect board to lean up against one of those telephone poles that went underneath the bridge. And I'd made a couple of trial runs running up to it to see if I could grab up to the first. They had two poles that went out across them that had the glass insulators on them. And I ran up and I'd been able to grab the bottom one. So I knew if I ran up that pole, up that board and leaped, I could get a hold of that bottom pole and I could pull myself up on that telephone pole. And I had figured if I could get up on that telephone pole, then I could reach up from the top of it and get a hold of the bottom part of that bridge at that one exact spot. So that evening I waited till it got good and dark. And so I got a flashlight, the same flashlight that my dad used when we'd go frog gigging. As a little boy, he'd let me carry the bag, and we'd go frog gigging around ponds and creeks. And I'd seen how he'd take that light and blind those frogs that hold still, and he'd giggle. And I thought to myself, I bet you I can do that with the pigeon. And so I had a flashlight. I put it in my back pocket. Best I remember, I had on Converse tennis shoes and low-cut Converse, and I had on a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt. I made my big run and grabbed that bottom pole with that flashlight, got a hold of that pole, pulled myself up. I was always a good climber. I pulled myself up, got up on that, pulled myself up on the next one, reached up, got myself up on the bridge, and climbed up to an area that was like 3 big wide boards that ran underneath this part of the bridge. They called that a catwalk, and it had like suspension wires that held it together. And if you walked out that catwalk, the further you walked out of it, the higher up you were off the land. And I got to the point where, as I walked out of it, I was about 40 feet, and it got close to 50 foot, and you get up that high. But at night, you can't see down in the bottom, or I couldn't see at that time. And so I felt comfortable, kind of like hanging tobacco in a barn. After you get the tobacco up underneath of you, you really don't work. You don't really sense that you're up, 50 foot up on the top, bend. And so if you fall out there, there's less chance for you to fall because you don't have that feeling of falling. You don't know your depth. And it was the same way with me on that bridge at nighttime. I couldn't see below me, it being dark, so I didn't realize I had such a bad fall if I did fall. But I knew if I fell, I'd be killed. When I walked out that bridge, that catwalk, and I started shining my light, there was arches on this part of the bridge, and ever so far these beams, I mean not arches, but beams that held sections of the bottom part of the bridge in place. And at the end of those beams were little square areas, and those little square areas were just about like, well, they were perfect places for pigeons. And as I walked down through there, I spotted a pigeon. And it was the prettiest pigeon I'd ever seen in my life. And I think that I'd saw that pigeon one time before, and had seen it that week. And it was part of the reason that I had wanted to go out there. I thought that had to be the prettiest pigeon I'd ever seen. It was this real pretty blue bar, sort of a lighter colored blue bar. I shined my light on it, and it was probably, that arch was probably 20 feet. And I put the flashlight in my mouth. I got a hold of that and I started shimmying up, keeping my light on that pigeon's face. He kept looking at me. I could see he had beautiful red orange eyes and had that beautiful neck, all that shimmering on his, all that hackle, you know, and the purple and the greens and the violets and the blues, all the different colors, maroons and everything. Anyways, as I got closer and closer, I got more nervous. I could see the bird was just a little bit nervous too. But when I got close enough to make it, I grabbed him. And when I got a hold of him, he almost got away from me, but he didn't. And I held on to him for all I was worth, and I had my legs wrapped on that beam. And I started shimmying back down, hanging on to that pigeon with that flashlight in my mouth. And when I got down to back to the catwalk, I managed to straighten myself back out. I held on to that pigeon. I walked back to the catwalk, climbed back down, got on the lower part of the bridge, got back down on the telephone pole, and hanging on to that bird all the time, went back down the board and got back down on the railroad tracks. And when I got down on the railroad tracks, I went up a hillside. It was full of kudzu, vines, had a little trail cut up through there, and I went up this bank, went through a gravel parking lot, went up that sidewalk, and there was the marquee, my grandfather's theater. All the lights were on Saturday night. It was beautiful. It was, you know, it was like a circus almost. MACK Theater. My grandfather's name was, he's a McClanahan, and it had, his name was MACK, it's for short, and there it was, the MACK Theater, all lit up. And my mother was in the ticket booth selling tickets, and my grandfather was taking up tickets, and I went through the door of the theater. It was open, and my grandfather saw me walk through with that pigeon, and I went into where the ticket booth was at, right just around the bend, the little booth. And my mother had a little bitty fan blowing on her. She had a little electric fan, little metal fan blowing her to keep her cool at night. And I said, "Mom, look what I got." And she turned around and looked at me. "What you got?" I said, "Caught a pigeon." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "It's got bands on its legs." And my grandfather, he came in, he called me Robert. "Robert, what do you got?" And I told him, I showed him my pigeon. I told him it had two bands on its leg. It had a band on one leg and a band on another. And I said, "This band here is AUKY 57, you know, and the band number 071 or something like to that, if I'm not bad mistaken." Anyways, he wrote it down. My grandfather was a very smart man. He learned a new word every day. He always pushed me to go to college. He said, "Robert, there's one thing that everything you own in this life will get stolen from you at some point or another, except one thing." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Your education." That always stayed with me. So Daddy Mac, he wrote the band number down of the pigeon, and on the other leg it said CHAS, which stood for Charles, Heitzman, HEITZMAN, J-Town, Kentucky. J-Town and then KY. Now, he wrote that down. I didn't think a whole lot about it, but I was tickled to death. It having bands made it even more special. That means somebody had it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was a racing pigeon or a homing pigeon. I never heard of anything like that. Nobody I knew ever heard of a racing pigeon, and I didn't know what I had really. It was a beautiful bird. That's all I know. Well, my grandfather said that he'd help me put it in a cage. He had every year around Thanksgiving, he had a raffle at the theater, and inside the main lobby, when you walked into the theater, he had a turkey. He put on the concrete floor there in a big chicken wire cage, and people would buy raffle tickets, and people would get to feed that turkey, and he fed it corn and stuff, and I loved seeing those turkeys every year. I love turkeys. They're a fascinating bird. And anyways, I got to use that turkey cage to put that blue bar cockbird that came from Heitzman. That was my first cage to put a pigeon in. Of course, it wasn't a loft, but it was a place to keep the bird for a little while. My grandfather kept it back in another big room in the where he kept all his records and kept his stuff for, he kept a big safe back there. I mean, anyways, he told me about 2 days later that I came into the theater and he said he had located who this man was, Charles Heitzman, and he was outside Louisville in Jeffersontown, and he spoke to him on the phone and told my mother and I that Mr. Heitzman wanted this bird back. If we could possibly bring it up to him, he would pay for Daddy Mac's gas and be very happy to meet us. So my grandfather kind of urged me, come on, let's take this bird back to the man, and I said, okay. And so we made an arrangement. About 2 weeks we left on a day, took the guy who ran the film, the projectors, the movie projectors, Herman Long. He sat in the front of Daddy Mac Chevrolet, and Daddy Mac had, and I sat in the back with the cardboard box and had that blue bar. And we drove, it seemed like the longest time. We had to go through Richmond and Lexington and then get on the highway and go up to Louisville. And where Heitzman lived was just outside of Louisville in Jeffersontown. And Heitzman had this beautiful estate, I don't know, 25 acres there or something, this country estate right outside the city. Had a creek that ran by and cedar trees and all this, just lots of big trees, mature trees. As we approached Charles Heitzman's home, we had to go over a little bridge that Heitzman had built. And there were pigeon statues and said Charles Heitzman, you know, racing pigeons. And I was like, oh my God. And then we pulled up to his house. We were looking, I mean, this was like pulling up to a castle. You know, it had Spanish roof, tile roof on it, and I'm looking at this home, I'm like, oh, and my grandfather's looking. We'd never seen a home, you know, that to us it was so beautiful back in an estate like. And we pulled up in the driveway, and Mr. Heitzman came out. Yeah, Mr. Heitzman was all businessman. He had his hair combed back, and he had his white dress shirt on. He wore a white dress shirt all the time, and dress pants, and came out, met my grandfather, and shook hands with Daddy Mac, and they loved each other. They were both about the same height. They were both short men, both very successful men, both very smart men. And I don't know, they just had a natural, instant liking for each other. And Heitzman said he judged people a lot of times on their handshake, and that was exactly what my grandfather would always say. You know, a good person had a good, strong handshake. And but anyways, they sat and talked kind of like I'm doing right now in the shade by up underneath by the library, while Herman and I walked around the lofts. Of course, Heitzman kept his eye on me. I kept seeing these beautiful pigeons out in the aviaries, and I just thought I had died and gone to heaven. I'd never seen such beautiful birds. And when we came back over to Heitzman, we all went into his famous library and signed his library book. Anybody that came, it was like a hotel register. He made you sign the book. And he had, you know, the Queen of England, her loft manager, and just all kinds of incredible people had signed that book over the years, had visited Charles Heitzman to see his lofts. We thought we were doing something special, and he gave us a Coca-Cola out of his little refrigerator. He said that's how he kind of helped promote his bakeries. He was in the bakery business, and said he was one of the first places around that started also having Coca-Colas in his business, and a lot of people would come to get a Coke, and then they would get a cookie or a cake. So he told my grandfather, he took the bird and he explained to us that it was a pure old Sion, Paul Sion, and that it meant a lot to him. Descended from his original pair, and that he'd gotten lost on a 600-mile race in a storm. And he gave me some magazines and some information, and he said for us to come back in the spring, and he would give me some birds. And we did come back, and he gave me more birds and more magazines, and that's where I got started with pigeons. I want to kind of end this here. I want to show you a few of my, it's the middle of the summer. The birds are in the moat right now. I'm just going to show you a couple of birds because people always want to see a bird when you're shooting a video. And I'm not going to tell you fantastic. This is one of the young red cocks that I've raised this year, the young bird. You'll see what we call a brick red. Heitzman had a lot of these brick reds in his loft. He prized them. You see I've got the red, goes all the way up into the wings. Pure old Paul Sion. Gorgeous pigeons, got the classic Sion face. This has got chestnut eyes. I call him a classic No Sweat Sion. He's one of the birds I try to breed for, this particular dark red with the red going out, the red in the back, the red coming up underneath the rump. He's tight vented, closed back, perfect wings. I got a hen right here. Really, I just got her out of the loft because she's not real showy, but I raised almost 800 pigeons this year, 800, and I consider her as one of the top pigeons that I raised this year. She's perfect. The vents are welded together, it's close to her keel. You can't, I mean, physically she's perfect. Single tail, flight feathers come up. I call them the mallard duck, long flight, pointed wings, got the right kind of space ratio in between the feathers out on the end flights. Things that you really look for long distance flyers. You get a good even beat flying down through the air with this kind of wing, like a duck does, flying, migrating. This bird's out of summertime in the Maltese falcon, and I have full brothers and sisters of this bird flying in the biggest pigeon race in the United States this year. I'm not somebody that's sitting back saying, oh, I got Sions, and they may go back on somebody and just let it go at that. Now, I got Sions that are flying in the biggest races in the world today, racing in the biggest races in the United States right now. They're not living off something that happened. Birds that cost $1,000 basically to enter a race, one bird. So I've got a lot of faith in them doing very well. I'm trying to get through here, and this is a classic silver Sion. If you'd went into Charles Heitzman's lofts, you'd have seen this Sion 100 times. This is Sunshine Superman. He was the best cock bird I ever raised out of a beautiful silver hen named Fatty. Sunshine Superman. And I've also got a bird that's related to him named Sergeant Pepper that's in the Florida Derby this year, a silver. And you can see what kind of wing structure he's got as well. Very similar to her, but a much longer wing. And Heitzman was big on wing ratio, the length of the wing versus the length of the body. I'll talk about that a lot later. Well, the only thing I'm going to end this video up today, I just wanted to talk about my beginning, is that I got a letter this week. I thought it was a bill. And I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll end this video. It's from the American Racing Pigeon Union. It's located in Oklahoma. Dated August 15th this year. Earl Robbins Jr. Dear Earl, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the American Racing Pigeon Union, congratulations on being named as an inductee to the member of the Hall of Fame. Your leadership and support of your fellow pigeon fanciers is sincerely appreciated. We are honored to recognize you as an AU legend. A presentation will be made in your honor at the upcoming 2025 AU Convention, which will be held October 16th through the 18th in Chicago, Illinois. The awards presentation will be held at the 4 Points at Sheraton Chicago O'Hare Airport. Exact time and date of this presentation is to be determined. If you are unable to attend, please let us know and we will ship the plaque to you. Congratulations, Lauren Gandara, the Executive Director of the American Racing Pigeon Union. So there it is. You saw where I started, and now I'm in the Hall of Fame.